Yeah.
I have a new rule that I enlisted in the last year, where I do not talk or I don't text anybody back until 10:30 in the morning, and I'll get up early and do a couple hours of shit that I want to do before anybody interrupts me or pisses me off during the day.
You seem to have forgotten that I am a woman.
Hell yeah, dude. All right, everybody. Hey, how you doing? Welcome back to Haus Haux. This is your hostess, Moush, and today I am joined by friend, comic, producer, Mike Coscarelli. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello. Thank you for having me, Ani.
Oh, my God. There's so much that I admire you for. You're producer for iHeart Media. You're the producer for Guys We Fucked.
Yeah.
We've worked together on their comedy special, so we'll talk about that a little bit. But you have a lot of experience and a huge past in this industry. And I wanted to have you on and talk a little bit about sort of your perspective.
Sure. Yeah, I appreciate that. Nothing I like more than coming on here and just bullshitting about
Awesome.
thoughts and opinions.
Awesome, dude. When did you start in comedy and production in general?
So they were pretty close together. I started in radio first.
Oh, okay.
And it was an accident. I didn't mean. I wouldn't say I went to film school, but I went to college and I was interested in film and writing, screenwriting, and all that stuff. And comedy was kind of always there. I was always into comedians, and I always wanted to be funny and write funny stuff, and that was always kind of my vibe. But I was doing college radio.
Okay.
Because they just...
Where'd you go to college?
Kane University in New Jersey.
Yeah.
Not a great school, but they basically... The one good thing about it was they kind of just gave you the keys to do whatever.
Awesome.
The teachers were very hands-off. And that might
Teach
be...
yourself.
Yeah, it was kind of here's some equipment, go nuts. So,
Yeah.
For me, that almost kind of was better, that I had an opportunity to... So the radio station was like that, where it was the first time... for the most part, everything was still... It was half analog and half digital.
Okay.
Because this is I graduated in 2013.
Okay.
So you're talking 2011, probably. So it was right in between things becoming all digital.
Yeah.
I still was using mini discs, and we were recording things on cassettes and stuff like that. But I was 20 years old, and he was just you can do a radio show.
Did you have a name of your show?
It was called The Crunch.
The Crunch.
It was named after a Led Zeppelin song.
That's the name of this episode.
Yeah, The Crunch. That was the first one I did, and that was a show because I was very into music, and I wasn't sure what I was going to actually end up doing with
All
my
kinds
life.
of music, rock and roll. What kind of music?
I would say most kinds of music, but it was heavily at that time rock and roll.
Okay, cool.
And that I was learning. I would go. I understood. I kind of had these seeds of how to do a radio show.
Yeah.
Naturally, I knew that I had to have something to talk about when
Yeah.
I would go on air and play these songs. If you're going to play a live song, tell a little story about
Sure.
I inherently knew that. Nobody was listening to this because it was college radio.
Yeah.
And I don't think the antenna at Kane even covered the whole town. I don't think it covered Union, New Jersey. It was you get maybe a couple people listening by accident in their car.
Yeah.
But it didn't matter. It was just practice for understanding this stuff.
Yeah.
So then when I started looking for internships, I didn't really know how to get a writing internship, and if something like that even existed, or really a film. I didn't really know how to... I didn't have any help.
Yeah.
So nobody really... But I was into the radio thing, and I sent out internships requests, and I ended up getting one at PLJ, which is a radio station here. Was a radio station here in New York. It's fucking gone now.
Wow.
But it was it was the old rock station in the
Cool.
80s, and
Legendary.
yeah, legendary
Very
station
cool.
had become kind of a adult contemporary. They call it Hot AC.
Okay.
So they were playing Matchbox 20 and kind of like mom music.
Sure.
But it was still really wild to go into that setting because it was at the very tail end of when radio was kind of important.
Yeah.
So you got to see. I always tell this story about like you can see the fall off in importance of radio, and this also kind of influenced me to try and do other things.
This is interesting.
So what happened was the first day I went into PLJ, I was walking down the halls, and they had the secretary was just like showing me the building, and they had in the hallways they had plaques. They had like "Let It Be," like a gold record. They had they had Bon Jovi, like gold record. Like all these like gold records of all these bands that I had liked and everything. So it was very almost overwhelming. You're just like, Jesus Christ, I can't believe I'm here.
Yeah.
And at this time, so within the first week I was there, I learned that record companies, because they still really valued radio play, they would bring in their new artists to the radio station, and they would try to get the new artists to like, it was like a trade basically. They'd come in with the artist, and the artist would do a concert for us in our conference room, and then the record company would buy us lunch. So you'd basically be like, for lunch, you would just go into the conference room and like watch whoever.
A free mini concert.
Yeah, and then the artist would stay there and like sign.
Like MTV Unplugged.
Right. So now sometimes the artists were like, you'd never heard of them.
Yeah.
And they just never made it really. Yeah. So there was a couple of those that I saw where it was just like some like folk singer that just like kind of didn't do anything really, but he was super nice, signed everything.
Wow.
And then another concert was Adele.
Oh my God.
And it was like Adele before she hit.
I literally was about to be like Alanis Morissette. Like that was the next one.
It was like Adele came, and so this was before the big album came out. Yeah. So she had the album out, and she was still like kind of like young and like kind of chubby hipster Adele.
Yeah.
And then the next album came out, and she became the biggest thing. So I saw her in a conference room before she ever.
That's really fucking cool.
But
yeah.
This like goes to show you that at that time it was still pretty important.
Yeah.
And within a couple of years that was over. Those lunches stopped within probably like 2 years of me. I worked at PLJ, or I worked in that building because I bounced around radio stations in that building. But I worked in that building for like 7 years. I'd say the first 2 we had those like lunches where they would bring in, and then those slowed down.
Wow.
Because Spotify became like a serious contender.
Streaming services and
stuff. It just became not as important. Like they still cared about the radio play, but not the way that they did when I started.
Yeah.
So I was going through all that, and I kind of like learned how to do a lot of this stuff in FM, which was like music radio. And then within a couple of years, I got my first. They moved me over to talk radio, and I was a swing producer. So I was working for WABC in New York, which had.
Can you tell people what that means for people who don't know what that swing producing means?
Swing producing means that you're like. I was kind of training still. They were teaching me how to do all this stuff, mostly running mixing boards.
Yeah.
For a live radio show, you're just kind of like...
leveling the sound and making sure things are like...
Yeah, and also throwing to commercial breaks. You're like running the clock of the show.
Making sure people don't swear on radio.
Yes, you have the dump button, you have all that stuff. So that's like your job to make sure. I mean, it's their job not to curse, but it's your job to make sure it doesn't
We were watching Private Parts last night, so I just have Howard Stern in my head now.
Well, funny enough, the one of the first shows I was swing producing for was Imus.
Oh my God!
Yeah.
Wow.
It was towards the end.
Holy shit!
That was a brutal shift. You'd have to get up at like 5 a.m. and work on. At that point, I was like moving commercials around and but I made some mistakes on his show, and he chewed me out on air. And it was that was a very serious learning experience because he was just
I have always had, even before I started doing any kind of production, I've always had the utmost respect for producers on shows and on any show.
Yeah.
Because what people don't understand, I posted something about this today too. I think the majority of people don't understand that producers are also artists.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And even when you're a professional and even if you're in a learning situation or whatever, you're still an artist. There's still like a little bit of you in whatever comes out.
Yeah.
And like when you get yelled at about your art, or when you're in trouble, like it's almost worse because you're like, fuck, this was a part of me too.
Yeah.
And then if you have other people coming in and like commenting or working on your projects, and it's not that it takes away from you, but it does make it a harder collaborative experience. And I think people like overlook that a lot when it comes to just, oh, you're a producer, like, oh, you work on a show, but there's so much more to that.
Well, it's also with Imus in particular. I mean, when you made him,
that's a totally different scenario, but
well, it's just like with him, I was 24, I think, 23, 24. I was just shitting my pants that this was like I knew who he was. I was very aware, even though by the time I got to work with him, he was like on his last leg. Like he was very old and very, very much like wrapping his career up. Like he was kind of a mean guy, and when you're starting out, you think that there's like, if you make a mistake, that's the end of your career.
Right.
And then like the farther away from it you get, the more you realize like, oh, it was completely fine. He was being a prick. Right. But also it was kind of like...
You also don't know what you don't know.
You don't know what you don't know. But again, at the time that I was learning all of this stuff, I was learning how to do this stuff at a time where like radio was on its way out.
Yeah.
Like the importance of the listenership of these shows was shrinking. So it really was a great learning experience because podcasting was like coming in right behind that stuff. And obviously running a live show is different than producing a podcast, but you still basically get those skills and you learn how to do it, which is great because the stakes you find out later were so low that the radio station was just like eventually got flipped and sold and it was barely staying alive to begin with. Like you making a mistake on I Missed a Show really doesn't mean anything in the grand scheme of things.
I mean, that and think of how much you now know about people just from that experience. Like some of the, I don't want to say like worst experiences or worst bosses or whatever, but someone who's like gotten in my face or like really had something to say, like that has affected how I do that job forever. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's like traumatic in a way.
Yeah.
Or not
in a good, almost in a good way.
Either way.
It could go either way for sure. Like I've had some jobs that straight up burnt me out. I don't ever want to be like in that industry again. But then, there are certain artists or whatever that I work with who have a very particular way of being. But then you learn like about sociology that way and like how people tick. And I think it just makes you a more well-rounded person, honestly.
Yeah, well, in that job in particular, so like when I started with Imus, well, not just on his show, but I was like so they would fill me into other shows that would need it to. So it would just be like my shift.
Also, not to interrupt you, but like for a company like that to put you on a show with someone, they know that you're capable. So even in the mistakes that you made, they wouldn't put an incapable producer on a big show like that, right?
Well, I think that it got a point. It was like you have to start somewhere, and I think that they have to.
Trust you a little bit.
Well, it's like it's a job that didn't really pay that well, so you're not going to get somebody that has 10 years of experience running mixing boards for $14 an hour, which is what I was making back then. You work like an 8-hour shift, like. You really break it down, you're not making that much money. So it's a job for a kid, which is obviously what it was. So I had just been in the building long enough where they're like, all right, maybe he's showing interest. Maybe it's time that he has a couple of years understanding. And I would shadow some of the FM DJs. Like I had been around this stuff, but I had never touched a board on air, And then they just threw me in, and the first day I did it, probably the first week I did it, I was like, I have to quit. I suck at this. I can't do this. It's so stressful. Like you're live when you make mistakes, whoever's listening fully hears it, and like,
oh yeah,
it's live. So if you don't, a lot of it's technical. So if you fuck up technically and you're really like you don't know how to fix it, it's a bad fuck up.
Oh yeah,
and I had a bunch of those early on until I really kind of like learned but it took a while, and that's
finessing.
Like. Yeah, so when I was working on a bunch of different shows, and then eventually, the station went more local. So they were doing local New York type shows. Okay. And my first real producing job where I was like a steady producer on a show was this show called Curtis and Kubi, which was the guy that actually just ran for mayor. Curtis
really?
Sliwa. Yeah, the guy with the beret.
Oh, okay.
That was his show. Yeah, I worked for him, and then Ron Kubi, who became my mentor essentially. He's the civil rights attorney one of the smartest people, probably the smartest person I've ever met in my life. Super funny. But to what you were saying before about being a producer, like the involvement of artistry, that was the first time I realized that like when you're working on a show and your voice is a part of the show, it's also partly because you mesh with the hosts.
Yeah.
So I meshed with Curtis okay. Like Curtis is like this he's a very hard egg to crack. It's very hard to really ever understand what's going on in there. But Kubi and I are still close to this day, and you're talking, this is like, I don't know, like 7 years since we've even really worked together on anything. But we just had this like mind link where his sense of humor and my sense of humor ran like right, like parallel to each other.
I love that.
Yeah, and
that's
it was
awesome.
just, so we did these whole thing. We used to do, when Trump was running for office, we would do this like whole Trump hour and try to make it as funny as possible. And Kubi's a super liberal, so it's like it felt good to be doing something related to Trump that wasn't like completely stoking the fires of you know, when the rest of the station was kind of like a conservative station. And they were all just like sucking at the Trump tea. So we were kind of one of the only shows that was like kind of anti-Trump, and and that was cool. But I'm doing all of this in the daytime, and then I'm doing stand-up at night. I had started doing stand-up, I guess, probably right around the time I started getting the swing producer job. I was kind of doing them at the same time. And
how many hours of sleep a night did you get? Like one?
Well, I mean, you're young, you're in the city, like you're driven to do this thing.
Absolutely.
And at that time, I was out.
Thing.
I was out. I mean, I got lucky that once I started working on Curtis and Kubi, I didn't have to be in the station until like 10:30.
Oh, that's a luxury.
So it was great. Our show didn't start till noon. We had like you're kind of prepping on the way in. You're like reading stuff, like newspapers, whatever, and then you're 10:30. You're like pulling audio and getting the show together.
Yeah.
So that helped. But I had some nights. I also slept at the radio station a lot.
Yeah, dude.
I had an air mattress there. So I'd go into work, and there was like an engineer who worked there that had an office that he was like about to retire.
Yeah.
And he was just very cool. This guy, Frank D'Elia. I just wanted to shout him out because he was so nice
Frank,
to me.
Dude.
But he would come in early. So basically I had till 8 a.m. So if I was out like all night, I could go back to Frank's office, put my air mattress out, and sleep until 8.
Oh my God.
And then I could wake up and like go get a coffee and kind of start like prepping the show. I didn't do it. I did it probably like once a week.
Yeah.
Where I was just like, I was out all night.
That's the grind though. Yeah. Like those are the sacrifices that you make. Like I talk about this all the time. Like when we started back in Boston, we were in like a small attic room, half the size of this room.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you were talking about live production.
Yeah.
That's how I learned how to produce. Like Irish put me on. We used to produce our podcast live to YouTube, stream live to YouTube and Facebook. And I would, the first time I ever did it was live. And I don't know over there, how did I do? I'm still working, he said. Yeah, I mean, like, it. I think the adrenaline to not fuck up was greater. Yeah. But like you do, obviously, and then
live
you learn.
Really makes it like a different ball game.
And then also with that, like, I mean, this is a little different than radio, but when we were doing podcast stuff live like that, you have to watch the chat too, and like be involved, and like it's for one person, it's a lot, but. That's how I've learned anything really well, is just diving right in. Yeah. And like being fully committed. You know what I mean? Like living in a studio when we first moved here for 8 months with all of our podcast equipment and all like our bed and like everything in the same room. Like those are the sacrifices that you make for a dream that's not always glamorous.
Well, and it's tough. I think that so stand up, like pivoting to stand up, the one thing that really shook me at first, because I've since stopped doing stand-up. I just can't. I don't have the stamina anymore, and I like kind of lost interest in it, and I just started making too much money doing this other stuff. Yeah. It just didn't make much sense anymore. I don't think I loved it the way I loved it 10 years ago or whatever. But when I started doing it, when you learn that in New York at least, the mentality is that at least when I started doing it, I don't know if it's changed, but like the mentality is that you do it every day and you do it a lot. You do it like you go here and then you run to another place and you do it like 2-3 times a night. the first person that was kind of like telling me about the hustle of that, I was blown away, and I was like, I'm never gonna do that. And then I started thinking, you know, like I was looking around at other. I was like, when do you sit around and watch TV? Like, when do you do? And all these people were like, we don't. I mean, what do you mean? When do we sit? Like, we're out here every day doing this, and it's like our life. And I started thinking about other people that I kind of grew up around, and like other friends that I had that did not pursue either an artistic lifestyle, or even beyond that, like a lifestyle that really embodies a level of success professionally, I guess, because success can mean a lot of things, and I've come to learn that in my 30s, that like a lot of people are just very fine having a family, having a house in New Jersey, and and that's totally fine, and you know, at some point maybe that will be healthy for me to have. But
you're speaking to my soul right now. Keep going.
In my 20s, I looked around at these people, and I was kind of just like, well, that's why they're not doing anything. Like, because they're, I don't want to say like wasting the time, because I don't think that I have a very unhealthy obsession with work, and I'm working on it, but you know, you just can't break through to a certain level of anything if you don't throw yourself into it. Yeah. And that was something that I did with radio, that I didn't realize it until I was kind of done with it, that I was working my ass off. You know, I had 6 days a week at the radio station, because I did a network show on Saturday mornings. So I would go out Friday nights at the Village Lantern in New York on Bleecker Street. I would do shows there all night on Friday night, and then I would go back to the radio station and sleep at the radio station on Friday night, and wake up at 9 a.m. on Saturday and do another radio. Like, I spent way more time doing these things. It's like if you were a painter and you just you painted for 10 hours a day. Every day. You know, and maybe took a break on Sundays. That's basically what I did, and I hadn't realized it until I was kind of like I had moved on, and now it's been almost 13 years since I've been doing some mix of all of these things, and I can't remember a time that I wasn't. And also, there is now this level of security where for a while I was just kind of like, I was like, I don't know. There might, like, who knows? Who knows if I'm here to stay? Yeah. Who knows if I'm actually in this industry to stay? And then, like, I kind of had that moment.
Because it will fucking test you, man.
Yeah, and it's just kind really of like there's so many people that I think want to do it that.
Or just see it as, like, this is really cool.
Yeah.
I make my friends laugh, or like whatever the fuck.
Yeah.
Even in podcasting, I mean, we see it all the time. Like, people want to come in here and they just want to, like, shoot the shit with their friends and basically record it.
Yeah.
And they don't understand that, like, okay, a podcast, particularly in your industry, is an extension of you, an extension of your social media, extension of, like, what you're doing beyond this moment in time talking with your friends. And the only people who are going to listen are the people who want to know about the things that support that, like, if you're a comic, that main goal of comedy and whatnot.
Well, and even beyond that, like, a lot of the shows that I get to work on with iHeart, which I'm really thrilled about, are more like documentaries.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, they're like scripted, and they, like, iHeart will usually work with someone who's a writer or has some sort of IP. So I'm working on this show right now about MySpace.
Okay, yeah. Oh, yeah, you started. Tell me more about this.
Well, I don't know, like, how much.
Whatever you can.
Well, part of it is it's not really, we're very early in the production of it, but so there's this writer, Joanne McNeil, who wrote this whole book. It's a little bit more about just, like, the internet in its early stages, but MySpace was a big highlight, and we're kind of working on the story of how MySpace started, and like, we're really trying to capture the tone of that era of 2004 and, like, what society was like, and kind of like the early online communities and stuff like that. So we're working on scripts. Joanne's writing. You know, we're interviewing people. We're getting.
Should get Dane Cook in there.
I've pitched Dane Cook. Yeah, he's gonna be. I think he's hard to get, but because Dane Cook was like the original.
Staple.
Yes, he's like the MySpace guy. Yeah, 100%. But basically, like. So to piggyback on your point, so we're kind of like doing a show for a different type of audience, because it's not, the way podcasting has gone now, it's like very influencery on one channel, like one side of the industry, but then there's also kind of like the
educational kind of
like public radio influenced sort of thing where it's like all very scripted and all. So it's great to work on that because I hadn't worked on things like that up until the last like couple of years of my career.
Mm-hmm.
And to work with people that know how to do it is great because it's another like step into learning, which has been awesome. But now it kind of like, as the artist in me, now I'm very particular about podcast stuff for myself and things that I'm working on for me because, for that reason, I feel like I have enough time in this industry and enough know-how and enough of a style and enough of a an ear, like whatever you want to say, where I just don't want to do anything that is something that anybody else can do. So it's like I'm in this weird space where I like have one foot in both of those podcasting worlds, and now I really think that the last 6 months, maybe a year, has been, other than the actual stuff that I'm working on that pays me, has kind of been devoted to figuring out some sort of channel where I can kind of put both of those things on display. Almost like making an album or something like that.
Yeah,
and that's kind of the way that I think about it, where it's like I want to do something scripted that has my voice that isn't like an academic sort of pursuit.
Yeah.
And whether there's an audience for that, I have no idea. But I'm at a point in my career where like I think that sonically, whatever I put out there, like in comparison to like people that are kind of in my sphere, like I think I can just blow people away. I'm at that point.
I would agree. That's why I'm on this podcast.
I appreciate that. It sounds arrogant, I know, but it's just kind of like listen, you're never done learning, but since I've been working with some of the like audio people that I've been working with, it's great because I had this sphere of influence of people that are like interesting and funny and kind of drive things with their personality, and that's kind of the camp I've always worked in. But now having this extra layer of sound engineering, it is, I don't know, I was never expecting to get that tool, I guess.
Yeah.
And then it just kind of crept up on me, and I like learned how to make things sound great and kind of sound almost like visual, like movies.
Like designing the sound
in
a way.
Full-on sound
design.
And
exactly. That's also what Irish does as well. Yeah. And I think that is huge, particularly like now. Not everyone's doing a podcast, but like the boom kind of
feels like it, yeah.
Which means that people are either trying to self-produce or they're getting someone who's just like, hey, well, you just sit and like whatever. And they don't have any like formal training or somebody to teach them some kind of formal training. So the more that happens, the more special like your skill set is. You know what I mean?
Even this, it's like it's no, looking around here, you can't just build this unless you have some sort of idea.
I did this 3 different times.
Yeah, of course. But you guys have like you knew what you were doing when you put this whole thing together, and that is it's a tricky thing to try to just start doing some shit. And some people, man, like it's like watching movies. So like there's this whole industry of movies that just come out. You have no real idea who directed them.
Yeah.
Like they're just like, here it is. It's gonna make X amount of money. It's fine, whatever. And people watch them, and they're fine. Yeah. And then there are people that
people's friends watch them, and that's fine.
Yeah, right. I mean? It's just kind of like there's so many. I've seen so many like romantic comedies or whatever. I'm just like it could have been anybody directing this thing, putting it together. And then there's movies where somebody's got like their hand involved. And so podcasting has become this really weird thing where like there's a lot of things that I thought, because coming up in radio, they had a team of like, they were engineers. They were like, we cared about the way things sounded. We cared about like all of these like very nuanced things that we thought made a difference. Mm-hmm. And I think we've been proved wrong. That podcasting, like there are people that want to hear that like very tight, spruced up sort of like sound designed type of. There's totally an audience for that, but they are a different audience than the people that want to hear like an influencer with a microphone, just like holding the microphone, fucking like in a room with.
And their microphone's all the way over here. They have no attention.
They like take it out. Like I cringe when I see people like doing I was gonna take this out of the stand,
okay,
but
you
it doesn't.
can whatever.
Yeah, they just like take it out, and they're just like sitting there like I cringe.
People do that all the time.
There's nothing wrong with it, like in theory, but it's like that's something that you to hear this.
Yeah, it's so distracting.
But it really it kind of doesn't
average
mean
listener.
anything.
They don't even notice.
And that's the thing. It's like you're taking an audience that doesn't. They're not necessarily sophisticated. They just like you were saying before. In a lot of cases, they like the person they're listening to.
Yeah.
When it's kind of like a personality driven show.
Yeah.
And
I even think back to when I used to listen to the radio in my car. I had the shows that I really liked in the morning on my commute that I'd listen to, and then when they got to something I didn't feel like listening to, I'd change it to the next one. You know what I mean? Which is kind of like podcasting.
You want to feel like you're with your friends.
Oh, exactly.
And I think that's like the biggest key to all of this stuff. But I think part of it is also like you said, it's just it's very hard to go on to a microphone and just be interesting. Because not everybody's everybody's gonna have a podcast, and not everybody's interesting. So some people have to be better at it than others.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's just again, going back to the old stupid radio thinking, you'd put in the time essentially, and then you'd build up to becoming sort of a broadcaster, and that was a path. That path doesn't exist anymore. Now it's just I've worked with people as a producer who I've had this road of kind of doing things from a professional point of view, going the quote unquote right route or whatever. And then you just work with somebody who just their agent is just they kind of want to do a podcast. What do you think? And they've never done one before, but you're a producer, you got it. And you're just kind of yeah. When I truthfully, when I was working at Betche's, it was like that. It was we've never done this before, but you're a producer, you got this. And
how long did you work on their projects? Because they actually have a lot of audio projects. They have audio books.
I built
and
that.
You did?
I built that whole thing. Not the audio books. That's a whole different thing.
I want you to know. I listened, and it didn't. It wasn't lost on me. Well, all the stuff. I think it was right after college. That's a demo.
Yeah, for sure.
I listened to all their audiobooks, or not their
podcasts.
I don't know if they have. I don't think I listened to their podcast, but I knew it was a thing.
Yeah.
But it must have been in the time that you were working with them.
2018, 2019, 2020.
Maybe it was right before
I got let go from that place in the heat of the pandemic.
Wow.
2021. Yeah. Very heartless people.
Fuck.
I built up their podcast network. They had so Jared Fried and Jordana, they were doing You Up, which did have an audience when I got there. That was their biggest show, and it was doing very well. Mm-hmm. And they didn't know how to monetize any of it at that time. They were they would book one-off campaigns. They just had no idea.
Everyone's so confused about that.
Well, yeah, it's just because Jared was blowing up and they had their audience, and that was their one show that was really doing great. And then they had a couple other shows that were starting.
Yeah.
And they were just trying to figure out how to build a network and stuff. So I became the person that kind of put all that shit together.
Dude.
But they would do that to me all the time, where it was just
wow.
They booked a live show for one of their shows that wasn't. You Up always worked as a live show because Jared's really funny, and Jordana was kind of he would kind of elevate her, so she would kind of step up to the plate, and it was produced pretty well, and it was just very easy to trust them. Jared is he's a comedian. He can work a room for an hour. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that always worked as a live show and stuff like that. That didn't really give me a whole lot of stress when we were doing it, because I was if everything breaks, Jared can do stand up, and we'll be fine.
Yeah,
But then they booked a show for this diet show that they were doing. It was a
Diet Starts Tomorrow.
That show, yeah, that
I've
show.
heard of it. Yep.
Yeah. So they the show was doing pretty well, and there's one summer day in like 2019 where they pulled out a bucket and a bottle of Prosecco, and they like opened the Prosecco and they're like, hey, you know, we're toasting because we just booked our first live show for DST, and it's going to be at the Gramercy Theater. And I'm looking at the other podcast producer, and I'm like, what? Wait a minute, what? This is the first time we're hearing about it. There was no like meeting. There was nothing. They were just like, we booked a live show. All right. And we just like looked at each other, and we were just like terrified because we knew, of course, that was going to come down to us producing this fucking thing for these two people that don't perform. It was two of the other founders of that company that like
bananas, dude.
Are not comedians. They're not they're not actresses. They're not used to being in front of people, and they just booked a theater to do a show.
It just comes down to like people don't have good communication skills, because if they had told you that,
no, it has nothing to do with that.
You would have been like, what the fuck?
No, they were gonna do it regardless.
Really?
Like, yes. There was no getting around it. They were just like, we want to do this.
Yeah.
And basically, like, sure enough, we have like me and the other producer have this meeting, just with me and him, and we were just like, all right, we know this is gonna fall on us. What are we gonna do?
Yeah.
And then sure enough, Monday comes around, and they're like, all right, so ideas for a DST Live. We're like, what? You booked the venue. Do you have ideas? What do you mean ideas from us? We don't know what to do. And we had to put together. We produced it like a TV show. We had to like build out these segments and book guests because we knew it was gonna be a disaster if we didn't put our asses on the line and like really put the work into it. But I mean, you're running a podcast network, and then you have to do this live Broadway show. You know what I mean?
I mean, what an accomplishment, because you did it, right?
Yeah, we pulled it off, but it was just like. I just hate that was maybe the worst situation. Not just that show, but them like working with them was just such a bad situation because like they didn't have sort of the talent to carry a lot of these shows.
Yeah.
But they would expect the producers involved to like
compensate.
Well, they just would like DST was the perfect example where it was just like nobody prepped anything except for us, and it was just like they didn't look at anything before they go into the booth. They have a guest coming in. They like we prepped the show and they didn't even look at it, and then it's like they're looking at these notes 5 minutes before, and then they're like well, this isn't enough for us. It's like, hey man, you like any other host doesn't look at a producer and is just like what like where are all these questions for this? Like I've worked with enough people where it's like. You can help, you can give thought starters, whatever. But when I worked with Curtis and Kubi, it was like, this person's coming on. Do you need anything?
Right.
No, I read this thing and I read this and I have a bunch of questions.
Yeah.
And that was that. Like you're not when you're producing from a radio podcast point of view, like it's not on you to shape the whole show.
Right.
You might have input and influence, and you might be able to just say like. Help it along and shape it a little bit, but like it is on the host to know. I don't do a thing.
Absolutely.
Corinne and Krystyna, like
Thank you for segueing.
Well, they do. I don't help them.
Yeah.
They I help them if they need a guest booked that like. But honestly, they do most of the guest booking.
And you can tell though, like with their show. I mean, Guys We Fucked was actually the first podcast I ever listened to. Ever.
I think a lot of women.
Yeah. I mean, like I was. At the time, podcasts were new. I wasn't down to listen to podcasts. Everyone was like, true crime. And I just didn't give a fuck about that. And then one of my friends sent me one of the very first episodes.
Yeah.
And they were like, this is us. And I'm like, okay, let me take a listen. And I just always listened to it from then on. And so to then work with you guys, like on their special, on your studio now that you have, was such a full circle moment. I forget why I started talking about that. Oh yeah, but I admire them and you so much in the way that they like work on any of their projects, not just their podcasts, but like when they put something out, they know what's going out. They're like totally 100% behind it, and like that's what it is, and they put out a lot of content anyways. So really to keep the quality control and like, no, this is who I am is so important as a person, but also as an artist, and an artist who's influencing, whether you like it or not, so many people. And then like for anybody to start a podcast or do a podcast like that where you're like, this is a horrible experience, they're never prepared. It's just like, why even waste my time when I could be working with people who are prepared and are passionate about what they're doing?
Well, yeah, and that's the thing with Corinne and Krystyna specifically. It's like the
finding that is so
they're very easy to work with.
They are.
It's just not like and they have been like. They're so easy to work with that I've been working with them, I think, since 2017. When I
started listening.
Yeah, I think right around then. And you're talking almost about 5 years, roughly. Yep. And, like, it doesn't feel like it at all. Like, it feels like there's times where I'm like, I just started working with them. I'm like, no, I didn't. Wait a minute.
And you guys have done so much in that time.
Yeah, and the thing that's also great about them specifically is that they have changed. And I think the show has changed a lot. And they are just always authentically themselves, even if there's a fire, like if something bad is happening, it's like they are themselves. Krystyna will be herself and like tell you that something wild is happening in her life. Corinne will be herself, and like they don't divulge everything, but you know the show has kind of evolved from what it was in its
early stages.
Yeah, and it's become something very different because they have grown, and that's always they never. And this was another thing, the difference between them and Betche's. And I hate to keep bringing up Betche specifically, but like it was such a bad experience.
It's fine.
So the difference was that like when I was working at Betche's, and this is why I had such a problem with the way they did a lot of their content. They viewed their content as a business first and art second, or art not at all, really.
It's such a difference in
so
attitude.
It would just basically be like we'd have meetings, we'd be like, all right, how do we just get more people like paying attention to what we're doing? Like they would cater the whole show based on what the fans were saying, the people that followed the accounts, what they were so any little comment, like two people would comment, I don't like this, and all of a sudden we have to throw the whole fucking thing out and change this around so we can try to accommodate every single person that listens to the show.
It'll never happen.
Right. And then working with Corinne and Krystyna, they do the opposite. They're
Beautiful.
like, this is what we're doing.
Makes my heart happy.
And if we lose some people, then we're going to lose some people. Fuck them.
Yeah.
And like, we're just going to do this. And this is like what we want to do.
Yeah.
And I've always respected that attitude
so much.
Way more than the corporatization of podcast content and like media content where it's just like what can we do to please every customer? Like Corinne and Krystyna don't view the I don't want to speak like too much for them, but like in my experience working with them, they don't view the listeners as customers. They view the listeners as like you're here for us, so go with us.
I've
on this
never
journey.
felt like that. Not only just listening to them, like not even knowing them, but even after. No, it's been proven even more that that's the way that they are. And, you know,
it's amazing. It's really refreshing to work with because you just like you never have to worry about them. Like as somebody that has to edit the show, I never have to worry about editing something out unless they really feel like they fucked up.
Yeah.
And it's
rare.
1% of the time, if that, where one of them is just like, I might have gone a little too far there. Like they say what they say, they mean it. And I think Corinne said it on one of the intros to the show that we just did, that she's just like, anytime she feels like that, she goes and listens and listens back to what she said. And like almost every single time she's just like, I meant everything I said and I stand by it. And like, that's what it is.
Fuck yeah.
It's great.
Hell yeah. I know we have to wrap. So just two really quick things and then I'll let you go.
Yeah.
So we'll do accountability first. So I have one segment on this show. It's our accountability segment. It's where we report, where I report what I did with my art for the week to the listeners, our family and friends, fellow hoes.
Yeah.
But also I want to give you, the guest, an opportunity to, like, you were talking a little bit earlier, you're trying to find maybe something like, because you know sonically how you want things to sound and you're working on your own projects. So if there's something like that you want to throw out there, I'll throw it to you then. So you have a minute to think about it. But for my report this week, let's see. My candle of the month is out. So yay. I actually did it on time this month. So that's pretty cool. The postcards from my trip continues. I know every week I say it's done, but like, I keep adding stuff. But I made a promise to myself that by June 30th, it would be out for people to look at or at least pre-order. So I created a adult coloring book.
Oh, it's great.
Thank you. I can show you really quickly before you leave. But it's 12 pages, and it kind of takes you on like a year's journey.
Okay.
And
like a calendar.
Yeah, kind of. But the intention of it is like the thing that you're coloring is sort of like to think about like the words in that
that's
postcard. Cool. Thank you. It's my version of a 12-step program for myself.
Okay.
If anybody else thinks of it, that's on you. But I'm really proud of it. And I think that in the last month, I've been getting really personal with it in like the writing portion of it. And that's what's been taking me the longest. But every time I sit down to actually like write and do something about it, I don't have writer's block anymore. Thank you, Leo. So I'm really happy with that progress, and that's my report.
That's great.
Thank you. I'll turn over to you. Is there anything you want to like put out there in the universe you want to keep accountable for?
Yeah. Well, I have to finish the production that I'm behind on for the MySpace show.
Look out for that.
The unannounced MySpace show. I have 2 podcasts that I'm working on for myself. That one is something that I worked on a couple of episodes for. They're actually out. It's called Mike Coscarelli Rules. I'm taking my camera.
Yeah.
It's called Mike Coscarelli Rules. You can check out some of there's probably like 6 or 7 episodes back catalog, and it's kind of like the early onset of this fusion of the scripted, non-scripted. Like scripted has some interviews, has some segments and bits. So if you want to check that out, that you can do. There's like 6 or 7 episodes now, and I'm hoping to announce that I have more episodes coming, and hopefully, let's see, by the end of the summer, maybe.
Awesome.
So there's that. And I'm trying to write a script of something that I can shoot myself.
Awesome.
And I'm going to try to shoot it on film.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I have to buy a film camera to figure this out, but
I know a guy.
Film?
I can. We'll talk after this.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So those are the 2 things the main 2 things that I would like to put out there that I'm trying to work on.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love that. The second thing I was going to talk about was the comedy special that we worked on. But you know what? I would love to have you back and we can talk about that. And I
babbled a lot.
No. This is a podcast. This is what this is for. I always leave them wanting more, right?
Yeah.
But I will 100% put the link to our special day comedy special in the description of this podcast. Definitely check that out. We both worked very hard.
Yeah. You beautiful set design, by the way. You're welcome.
Thank you. I'm very proud. Proud of you, too.
All I did was sell merch and flirt with girls.
Important part of the whole experience.
The concierge of the special.
For real. Is there anything else you would like to plug? And then we will wrap this baby up.
I would say just keep an eye out for Mike Coscarelli Rules returning. Cool. And then I have something cooking with my friend Leo Wolf, who's a comedian in New York. We don't know when it's going to come out yet, but we're planning on a show. I don't want to say too much because we're behind on it. But
artists,
and just follow me
in
Instagram, mostly Instagram. You can follow me on Twitter. It's at Mike Coscarelli, but I'll be putting out stuff as I work on it. So
fantastic.
Find me there.
Hell yeah, dude. You guys, as always, can find me at Ani_Moush on Instagram and Twitter. Check out animoushmedia.com for my art. I'm adding my portfolio. That's something that I'm working on that you guys don't know about. I'm adding my portfolio to my website. But you can find my candles, find my art, all on there as well. And check out TooMuchContent.live. Subscribe to this channel. I love you guys. Peace.